Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into an ancient Roman household at the crack of dawn, where you're about to discover that managing daily chores 2,000 years ago made your modern to-do list look like a vacation itinerary. Picture this. It's still dark outside, you're lying on a thin mattress stuffed with straw, and you can already hear the fountain in the courtyard dripping with that maddening irregularity that's been keeping you half awake all night. The roosters haven't even started their obnoxious morning concert yet, but you're already stirring because in a Roman domus, whether you're the domina managing the household or one of the enslaved workers doing the actual labour, the chores don't wait for sunlight, coffee, or your personal feelings about Mondays. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not because ancient Rome was particularly deadly at dawn, though it certainly could be, but because the sheer relentless grind of keeping a household running without electricity, running water, or any modern convenience whatsoever would break most of us within a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the global sleep crew roll in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you do before your brain has even fully engaged with consciousness is reach for the fire, not metaphorically, literally. Because that brazier in the corner of your room has been slowly dying all night, and if it goes completely cold, you're looking at a frustrating hour of trying to coax flame from flint and steel, or, worse, having to send someone running to a neighbour's house to borrow live coals. You swing your legs off the bed, your feet hitting cold floor tiles, and shuffle over to where the bronze brazier sits. The coals are still glowing faintly, thank the gods. So you carefully add a few pieces of charcoal from the basket, blow gently until they catch, and feel that small victory that comes from not having to start from scratch. Around you, the household is beginning to stir. If you're wealthy enough to own enslaved workers, and most middle-class Roman households are, you can hear the rustle of bodies rising from their sleeping mats in the servants' quarters. If you're not wealthy, or if you are one of those enslaved workers, you're doing all this yourself while also preparing to wake the rest of the household. The hierarchy of morning duties is rigid. Fires first, always fires, because everything else depends on heat and light. You move through the dim house lighting oil lamps from your brazier's flame, creating small pools of flickering yellow light. These lamps, simple clay or bronze affairs with a wick floating in olive oil, will need constant attention throughout the day. They'll smoke, they'll sputter out, they'll need refilling. The Romans, for all their engineering genius with aqueducts and concrete, never quite cracked the code on efficient indoor lighting. Historians still argue whether wealthy Romans actually read much at night, or if that was mostly a daytime activity. Because even with multiple lamps, the light is pathetic by modern standards. The next priority is water. Your household cistern in the courtyard, if you have one, collected rainwater from the roof. But it's getting low this time of year. Someone will need to make the morning trip to the public fountain, and you're already mentally calculating how many trips that'll require. A standard amphora holds about 6 gallons, weighs roughly 50 pounds when full, and a household of even modest size might need 10 to 20 amphora per day for drinking, cooking, and basic washing. Your shoulders ache just thinking about it. But first, you need to check on the household shrine, the lararium. This small alcove near the atrium houses the protective spirits of your home. The lares, guardian deities, the penates, protectors of the pantry, and the genius of the paterfamilias. You make a small offering, maybe a bit of yesterday's bread, a splash of wine, a pinch of incense if you're not running low. This isn't optional religious observance, it's household maintenance. Skip your daily devotions, and when something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, everyone will blame you for angering the household gods. Even the most skeptical Romans hedged their bets on this one. Here's a quirky detail. Some households kept small amounts of salt by the lararium specifically for these daily offerings, and salt was valuable enough that it was sometimes part of a worker's payment, hence our word salary from the Latin salarium. You're literally paying the gods in what amounts to ancient currency. The sky outside is just beginning to lighten from black to deep blue. Dawn proper is still an hour away, but you can't wait. The day's momentum starts now, and if you fall behind in these early hours, you'll be playing catch-up until sunset. You grab a heavier cloak. The morning air is cold, especially in the open-air atrium and courtyard that form the heart of your home, and prepare to begin the water hauling that will define your next hour. The amphora is your nemesis, your constant companion, your back's worst enemy, and the defining object of Roman domestic life. You heft one of the empty clay vessels. They're shaped like oversized wine bottles with two handles and a pointed bottom that's completely useless for setting down, and head toward the door. If you're enslaved or poor, you're carrying this yourself. If you're middle class, you're supervising an enslaved worker who's carrying it. If you're wealthy, you're managing multiple enslaved workers who are each carrying multiple amphorae, possibly on a donkey. Either way, someone's spine is going to regret this by noon. Your nearest water source depends entirely on where you live in Rome. The wealthy have private lead pipes branching off the aqueducts, feeding directly into their courtyard fountains and cisterns. This is both a status symbol and a genuine convenience, though you still can't drink directly from the tap. You need to let the water settle in cisterns so the sediment falls out, and ironically, so the lead leaching from the pipes dilutes a bit. The Romans knew lead was problematic. Vitruvius wrote about how water workers looked unhealthy, but the convenience outweighed the concern. Historians still argue whether chronic lead poisoning from pipes actually contributed to Rome's decline, or if that's an oversimplified theory that ignores the complex reality of how Romans stored and used water. For everyone else, it's a walk to the nearest public fountain, or castellum, distribution tanks where the aqueducts feed into neighborhood access points. You're hoping to arrive early, before the morning crowd turns the fountain into a chaotic scrum of jostling bodies, gossiping neighbors, and the occasional fight that breaks out when someone cuts the line or fills too many vessels. The water flows continuously. The Romans never figured out valves and taps the way we know them, so water just runs all day, all night, forever. But the pressure varies, and there's definitely a pecking order about who fills up first. You reach the fountain just as the sun is properly rising, turning the sky pink and orange. The fountain is already busy but not yet packed. You recognize your neighbors. There's Marcus, whose shop sells cheap pottery, filling amphorae for his household. There's that grumpy freedwoman who lives 3 doors down and always complains about street noise. There's a professional water carrier, Aquarius, who's filling multiple vessels that he'll deliver to customers for a fee, because not everyone has the time, strength, or enslaved labor to haul their own water. The trick is positioning your amphora under the flow without dropping it. The pointed bottom means you can't just set it down. It's designed to be propped in a special stand, wedged in sand, or held by another person. You brace it against your hip, angle it under the stream and wait, and wait, and wait. A standard amphora takes several minutes to fill, and you've got multiple trips ahead of you. The water is cold, clean, and tastes faintly of the minerals it picked up during its journey from the mountains. The aqueduct system is legitimately one of Rome's greatest achievements. Water flowing from springs 20 or 30 miles away, arriving in the city through channels, tunnels, and bridges that maintain a precise gradient. It's free at the fountain, universal, and absolutely back-breaking to transport once you've collected it. Here's your quirky detail. Some Romans believed different aqueducts produced different quality water, and there were definite preferences. The Aqua Marcia was considered the best drinking water, cold and pure. The Aqua Alciatina was deemed only suitable for watering gardens and filling artificial lakes because it tasted weird. You have opinions about your water source the way modern people have opinions about bottled water brands, except your opinions are based on actually tasting the difference rather than marketing. Your first amphora is full. You hoist it up, the handles digging into your palms, and start the walk back home. 50 pounds doesn't sound like much until you're carrying it at arm's length for several blocks. Your shoulders burn, your forearms scream. You pass other early risers, bakers whose ovens are already heating, shop owners opening shutters, people emptying chamber pots into the street gutters. You dodge that particular hazard carefully, and the occasional drunk stumbling home from a night that went too long. Back home, you pour the water into your household cistern or into large storage jars called dolia. Then you turn around and do it again, and again. Depending on household size and daily needs, this might be 4 trips, might be 8. If you're preparing for laundry or a major cooking day, it could be a dozen. The water hauling alone can consume 2 to 3 hours of your morning, and this is just to maintain baseline household function. Some households buy water from professional water carriers at a markup, paying for convenience. Others have enslaved workers whose primary job is just this, hauling water all day, every day, until their bodies give out. You develop specific muscles for this, a particular rolling gait that distributes the weight more efficiently, and a deep resentment of anyone who wastes water unnecessarily. By the time you've finished your final trip, the sun is fully up, the city is awake and noisy, and you've already worked harder than most modern people do in a week, and you haven't even started breakfast yet. Now that you've got water handled, for now, it's a never-ending cycle. You face the next fundamental fact of Roman domestic life. Everything is dirty. Not metaphorically, not exaggerating for effect. Actually, physically, constantly, relentlessly dirty. Rome itself generates an apocalyptic amount of dust, ash, and grime, and your house is not a sealed modern box with weather stripping and HVAC filters. You've got open windows, no glass in most homes, just wooden shutters, an open roof atrium that lets in rain and whatever the wind carries, doorways that open directly to the street, and a courtyard that's basically controlled outdoor space. Dirt doesn't sneak in, it marches in like it owns the place. Your primary weapons in this war are laughably primitive. Brooms made of bundled twigs or straw, rags made from worn-out tunics, buckets of water, and your own aching back. You start with the atrium, the semi-public entrance room where clients and visitors will gather later. If you're wealthy, this space has a beautiful mosaic floor, and if you're middle class, it's probably decorated with simpler geometric patterns. Either way, it needs sweeping right now, because yesterday's dirt has mixed with the morning's dew to create a slightly damp film that shows every footprint. You sweep with long, methodical strokes, pushing the dirt toward the doorway where it'll eventually be dumped into the street. The Romans had a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of public versus private space when it came to garbage and cleanliness. Your house should be immaculate, but the street, that's everyone's problem and therefore no one's problem. Shopkeepers sweep their debris into the gutters. Households dump their sweepings out front. The city employs workers to clean major thoroughfares, but your average street is basically a medieval nightmare of mud, animal waste, food scraps, and construction debris. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wealthy Roman homes featured elaborate mosaic floors that cost a fortune and required careful maintenance. These weren't just decorative, they were status symbols that screamed, "I have enough money to install something beautiful and impractical that requires constant cleaning." You can't just drag furniture across mosaics without potentially dislodging tiles. You can't let dirt build up in the grout lines. You definitely can't let the slaves get sloppy with the wet mopping, because water damage to the mortar underneath is expensive to repair. Speaking of wet mopping, you fill a bucket with some of that precious water you just hauled and grab a rag. The technique is simple, but exhausting. You get on your hands and knees and wipe down the tiles section by section, wringing out the dirty rag into a separate bucket that you'll dump later. No mops with handles in the modern sense, just manual labour and the hope that your knees hold out. Some wealthy households use enslaved workers specifically for this task, assigning them sections of floor the way a modern office building might have custodial zones. The courtyard requires different tactics. If you have a peristyle garden, a colonnaded courtyard with plantings, the dirt there is intentional for the plants, but the walkways around it need sweeping. Leaves fall constantly. Birds leave their contributions. The fountain, if you have one, splashes water that creates muddy spots. You're basically in a constant holding pattern against entropy, trying to maintain the civilized appearance that separates a respectable Roman household from a barbarian hovel. Historians still argue whether Romans were actually as clean as they claim to be, or if the famous public baths and domestic cleanliness standards were more aspirational than actual. The archaeological evidence is mixed. We find beautiful homes with sophisticated drainage and water features, but we also find trash pits filled with broken pottery, food waste, and yes, human feces in unexpected places. The reality probably varied wildly by social class and individual household standards. Here's your quirky detail. Some Romans used crushed pumice stone as an abrasive cleaning agent for particularly stubborn stains on floors. Volcanic eruptions, Italy has plenty, occasionally provided a fresh supply of pumice, which would be ground down and used almost like a scouring powder. You're literally cleaning your house with volcano dust, which feels very on brand for Roman civilization. The sleeping quarters need attention too. You shake out the straw mattresses. They've compacted overnight and need fluffing like ancient pillows. Blankets get taken outside and beaten with sticks to release dust and discourage insects. The woolen cloth that Romans used for bedding attracted moths, lice, and all manner of creepy crawlies, so regular violent beating was essential maintenance. You hang everything in the courtyard to air out while you sweep the bedroom floors. If you have wood furniture, couches, stools, small tables, it needs wiping down. Roman furniture was often ornately carved or inlaid with expensive materials, and dust accumulation was unacceptable in any respectable home. You use a damp rag, working carefully around the carved details, removing yesterday's accumulation of household grime. By the time you finish this morning's cleaning cycle, you've been awake for 3 or 4 hours, you've burned perhaps 800 calories, and you're acutely aware that you'll be doing all of this again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, forever. The Sisyphean nature of housework is not a modern invention. Ancient Romans would absolutely understand the futility of achieving a permanently clean house. But for now, for this morning, your floors are swept, your atrium is presentable, and you can move on to the next category of never-ending chores. Laundry day in ancient Rome is exactly as terrible as you're imagining, and then somehow worse. You're looking at your pile of dirty tunics, togas, and linens, and you're making a calculation. Do you tackle this nightmare yourself at home, or do you send it out to the fuller, the professional launderer who is arguably one of the worst jobs in the entire Roman economy? If you're wealthy, the choice is easy. You send it out and pay someone else to suffer. If you're not wealthy, you're about to have a very bad day. Let's start with the professional option, because understanding what fullers do will make you appreciate every modern washing machine you've ever used. The fuller's workshop, the Fullernica, is a building you can smell from a block away. The primary cleaning agent for Roman laundry is stale human urine, collected from public urns placed around the city specifically for this purpose. Yes, Romans peed in collection jars, which were then sold to fullers. The Emperor Vespasian even taxed this industry, leading to the famous phrase, pecunia non olet, money doesn't smell. Though in a Fullernica, money absolutely smells like ammonia. Here's how professional fulling works. Your dirty clothes are thrown into large vats filled with water, stale urine, the ammonia breaks down oils and loosens dirt, and sometimes fuller's earth, a type of clay that acts as a mild abrasive. Then workers, usually enslaved or desperately poor-free men, climb into these vats and stomp on your clothes for hours. They're literally trampling your laundry with their bare feet in piss water. The mechanical action combined with the chemical cleaning power of ammonia does actually work. Your toga comes back clean, whitened, and relatively fresh smelling after being rinsed multiple times and hung to dry. But here's the thing, sending out laundry is expensive. A full-size toga requires maybe 4 to 6 square yards of fabric and weighs several pounds when wet. The cleaning process takes days. The fuller needs to be paid for labor, materials, and time. For many Roman households, professional fulling is reserved for special occasions. Your best toga before a public event, your wife's finest stola before a dinner party, the good linens when important guests visit. Everything else? You're doing it at home. Home laundry is a more primitive but equally exhausting affair. You haul multiple amphorae of water, more water hauling, your shoulders already hate you, and heat some of it over the fire. You fill a large basin or wash tub, add your cleaning agents, urine if you've saved it, or water mixed with soap made from animal fat and wood ash if you're squeamish, and start working the fabric by hand. Scrubbing, kneading, wringing, rinsing, repeating. The tunics your household wears daily are mostly wool or linen, and wool especially requires careful handling because it can shrink or felt if you're too aggressive. Historians still argue whether Romans actually wash clothes as frequently as we do. The evidence suggests that most people owned relatively few garments and wore them multiple times between washings, spot cleaning obvious stains and airing things out between uses. The modern concept of wearing something once and tossing it in the hamper would seem insane, wasteful of water, labour, and the garments themselves. Your quirky detail for this section. Romans believed that human urine from different people had different properties, and male urine was considered superior to female urine for fulling purposes. Some fullers allegedly paid premium prices for urine from men who drank particular types of wine. You're living in a civilization with pea sommeliers. After washing comes the nightmare of wringing out heavy waterlogged fabric. You twist and squeeze trying to extract as much water as possible because wet wool weighs a ton and takes forever to dry. Then you carry everything outside to hang on lines stretched across your courtyard, or, if you're in an apartment building, an insula, across the street between windows. The sight of laundry hanging from every floor of Roman apartment buildings was as common as the smell of cooking fires and street noise. Drying time depends on weather. On a hot, dry day, you might get lucky and have dry clothes by evening. On humid or overcast days, you're looking at multiple days of damp fabric attracting mildew and starting to smell musty. Some households have drying rooms where they hang clothes near braziers for faster drying. But that's a luxury, and also a fire hazard that's destroyed more than one Roman home. Special mention must be made of the toga. This garment, the formal, required dress for male Roman citizens at official events, is an engineering nightmare disguised as clothing. It's a semicircular piece of wool cloth, roughly 15 feet long and 7 feet wide, that's draped and folded in specific ways around the body. It's hot, it's heavy, 15 to 20 pounds of wool, it's cumbersome, and it falls apart if you move too quickly. And you're expected to keep it brilliantly white, which means either constant washing or paying fullers a fortune. The joke among Romans is that anyone who claims to love wearing a toga is either lying or insane. Most citizens wore togas only when legally required, in court, at the forum for political events, at formal religious ceremonies. The rest of the time, they wore simple tunics like sensible people. But that formal toga still needs cleaning, and whether you're doing it yourself or paying someone else, it's a massive pain. By the time you've finished dealing with laundry, washing, wringing, hanging, waiting, collecting, folding, you've lost most of a day and gained a renewed appreciation for synthetic fabrics and electric dryers that your ancestors couldn't even imagine. The Roman kitchen, culina, is basically a controlled fire hazard where you're expected to produce edible food without burning the house down, dying from smoke inhalation, or accidentally poisoning your family. No pressure. You enter this small, usually windowless room that's deliberately placed at the back of the house, away from the nice spaces, because everyone knows this is where things can go catastrophically wrong. The walls are blackened from smoke, the air is thick with the smell of yesterday's cooking, and you're about to spend the next several hours in what amounts to an ancient smoky torture chamber. Your cooking setup is primitive by any modern standard, but sophisticated by ancient ones. A raised brick or stone platform, the focus, where you build fires and balance pots. Some wealthier homes have multiple cooking surfaces at different heights, allowing you to manage several dishes simultaneously. The fuel is usually charcoal, which burns hotter and cleaner than wood, though it's more expensive. You've got a supply stored in a corner, covered to keep it dry, and you're constantly calculating how much you'll need versus how much you can afford. Starting the fire is never trivial. You carry coals from the brazier you've been maintaining since dawn, or you crouch down with flint and steel, striking sparks into a nest of dry tinder, usually dried leaves, straw, or shredded bark, and blowing gently to coax flame. This can take 30 seconds or 20 minutes, depending on how dry your materials are and whether the kitchen gods favour you today. Once you've got flame, you carefully add kindling, then small pieces of charcoal, then larger pieces, building the fire up to cooking temperature. The smoke is immediate and overwhelming. Roman kitchens don't have chimneys in the modern sense. They might have a hole in the roof or high vents near the ceiling, but mostly the smoke just fills the room and gradually dissipates or gets pushed out by more smoke. You learn to work with streaming eyes, occasional coughing fits, and the constant low-grade lung irritation that just comes with the job. Modern historians studying Roman skeletal remains can sometimes identify cooks and kitchen workers by the distinctive patterns of respiratory damage in their bones. Your cooking vessels are mostly bronze or pottery, expensive bronze cauldrons for the wealthy, cheaper ceramic pots for everyone else. You've got a tripod that holds pots over the flames, various sizes of pans, and those distinctive Roman mortars and pestles for grinding ingredients. Everything is heavy, awkward to handle when hot, and requires constant attention because temperature control is an art form you master through experience and burned fingers. Today's menu is relatively simple. Porridge for breakfast, bread that you'll either bake or buy from the baker, lentil stew for the main meal, and various small dishes depending on what's available. You start by heating water for the porridge, pulse grains cooked with water, maybe some oil or milk if you're not desperately poor, maybe some honey if you're wealthy. The pot sits directly on hot coals, and you stir frequently to prevent scorching. There's no temperature dial, no timer, just your experience telling you when things are done. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wealthy Romans had elaborate kitchens with multiple enslaved cooks, specializing in different tasks, One for sauces, one for roasting, one for pastries. The truly wealthy didn't even enter their own kitchens. They described what they wanted and an entire team made it happen. But for average Romans, cooking was a daily hands-on ordeal that couldn't be delegated away. The bread situation deserves its own explanation. Most Romans bought bread from professional bakers rather than baking at home, because baking requires a proper oven, a large dome-shaped structure that needs to be preheated with wood fire, then cleaned out before inserting dough, then monitored carefully. The fire risk of having a baking oven in a residential area was significant enough that many cities regulated who could operate one. But if you're making flatbreads, or very simple loaves, you might cook them on a hot ceramic griddle, or in a covered pot nestled in coals, turning them carefully to achieve something like even cooking. Your quirky detail: Romans loved garum, fermented fish sauce, the way modern people love ketchup or hot sauce. Every kitchen has multiple amphorae of this stuff in varying qualities. The expensive garum made from specific fish and aged perfectly is a luxury item. The cheap garum made from whatever fish scraps were available is still better than no garum. You add it to almost everything as salt seasoning and umami boost, and you literally can't imagine cooking without it. The lentil stew requires chopping vegetables, onions, leeks, maybe some cabbage if available. You use a knife that requires frequent sharpening, working on a scarred wooden cutting board that's probably breeding interesting bacteria by modern food safety standards. The Romans had no refrigeration, limited understanding of microbial contamination, and a remarkable tolerance for food poisoning that would hospitalize modern diners. Into the pot goes water, lentils, chopped vegetables, olive oil, herbs from your courtyard garden, and a generous splash of garum. You set it over the fire and plan to let it simmer for hours. Managing multiple cooking tasks simultaneously is where things get complicated. The porridge needs attention now. The stew needs occasional stirring. You need to prepare vegetables for later. You need to keep the fire fed with charcoal, but not so much that it gets dangerously hot. You need to avoid burning yourself on hot pot handles, spilling boiling liquid, or letting smoke accumulate so badly that you can't see what you're doing. Historians still argue whether Romans actually enjoyed their cuisine, or if the elaborate recipes we find in sources like Apicius's cookbook were aspirational rather than typical. The reality was probably that wealthy Romans ate adventurously and well, while poor Romans ate monotonously and just barely adequately. But everyone dealt with the same basic limitation. Cooking with fire is dangerous, exhausting, and time-consuming. By the time you've finished cooking breakfast and set up the main meal to simmer, you're sweating, smoke-stained, exhausted, and you'll be doing the same dance for lunch preparations in a few hours. The kitchen never rests. The daily shopping expedition is less a pleasant stroll and more a strategic military operation requiring alertness, skepticism, and a firm grip on your coin purse. You leave your house heading toward the forum or your local neighborhood market, and you're immediately joining thousands of other Romans in the morning shopping crush. The city wakes up hungry, and the markets respond with sensory overload. Vendors shouting competing prices, the smell of fresh bread mixing with rotting vegetables, animals squawking and bleating, and the ever-present undercurrent of too many humans in too small a space. Your shopping bag, probably a woven basket or cloth sack, is empty now, but will be heavy later. You've got a mental list: olive oil, grain for bread making or trading, garum, vegetables, maybe some meat if you can afford it, certainly some wine, possibly some cheese. The Roman economy runs on small-scale daily purchasing rather than bulk shopping, because without refrigeration, everything perishable must be bought and consumed quickly. You're going to make this trip basically every day of your life. The forum markets are crowded and chaotic. Temporary stalls and permanent shops line the main squares and spill into surrounding streets. Each vendor specializes: the oil merchant, the wine merchant, the vegetable seller, the butcher, the fishmonger. You've got your regular vendors, the ones who give you fair prices and don't constantly try to cheat you, but you still check quality carefully. That oil needs inspection for rancidity. Those vegetables need squeezing for firmness. The wine needs tasting before you commit to buying an amphora. Trust, but verify. Haggling is expected, required, practically the whole point. The vendor announces a price. You look shocked and offended. You counter with something lower. They clutch their chest and act wounded. You meet somewhere in the middle. This dance plays out a dozen times as you move through your shopping list, and you're constantly calculating: How much can you spend? What can you skip? Where can you compromise? The Roman economy doesn't have fixed prices for most goods. It's negotiated transaction by transaction, and your skill at bargaining directly impacts your household budget. Here's your mainstream fact. Wealthy Romans didn't shop themselves. They sent enslaved workers or employed professional shoppers, negotiators, to handle daily purchasing. This was partly about status. Important people don't carry their own groceries, and partly about efficiency. But for middle class and poor Romans, shopping was unavoidable personal labour. You're there, in the crowd, doing the work yourself. The olive oil merchant is your first stop. Olive oil is the foundation of Mediterranean cooking, lighting for lamps, and even cleaning. Romans used oil in strigils instead of soap for bathing. A household goes through absurd quantities. The merchant has multiple grades available, the finest pressing from the first cold extraction, progressively lower grades from subsequent pressings, and the absolute bottom-tier stuff that's barely suitable for lamp fuel. You're buying mid-range because quality matters, but so does budget. The merchant pours a sample into a small cup. You smell it, taste it, roll it around your mouth, checking for that characteristic peppery bite that indicates fresh oil. Satisfied, you negotiate price and watch carefully as he fills your smaller amphora from his large storage vessel. Olive oil fraud. Cutting good oil with cheaper alternatives, mislabeling quality, is common enough that trust matters. Next is grain. The Roman plebeian diet centers on grain, wheat, barley, sometimes millet, either ground into flour for bread or cooked as porridge. The grain merchant has various qualities, from expensive imported wheat from Egypt to local barley that's cheaper but coarser. You buy what you can afford, watching the measuring process like a hawk because shortchanging customers on grain measures is a classic scam. The merchant uses official grain measures, government-stamped containers, but that doesn't mean they're always filled completely fairly. Vegetables are seasonal and local. You're looking at onions, leeks, cabbage, turnips, maybe some beans or lentils if needed. The vendor's produce ranges from perfect to questionable, and the morning's best selections have already been picked over by earlier shoppers. You squeeze, sniff, reject anything that's too far gone, and negotiate bundles. That wilted cabbage is not going in your basket at full price. Your quirky detail. Roman markets had informal but real hierarchies about shopping times. The elite and their representatives shopped earliest, getting first choice of the best products. Middle-class households came next. The poor shopped last, getting whatever remained at slightly discounted prices. You could track someone's social status by when they arrived at market. The butcher's stall is your next stop, though meat is expensive enough that many Romans eat it only occasionally. Today you're buying some pork, cheaper than beef, more available than lamb. The butcher has cuts hanging from hooks, and the sight is not for the squeamish. No refrigeration means meat is fresh killed, often from animals slaughtered that morning. You point to what you want, negotiate the price, and watch as he carves your portion. Blood drips on the stone counter. Flies buzz around. This is shopping before food safety regulations, before health inspections, before anyone understood bacterial contamination. You're basically trusting that the meat smells okay and hoping your cooking fire will kill anything problematic. Historians still argue whether ancient Romans actually consumed as much meat as suggested by trash heaps and written sources, or whether meat was more of a special occasion food. The evidence points to significant class differences. Wealthy Romans ate meat regularly, while poor Romans subsisted mainly on grain porridge with occasional meat as flavouring rather than main course. You finish your rounds, a jug of wine from the wine merchant, cheap table wine, not the fancy stuff, some cheese, a handful of dates for sweetness, fresh herbs that you couldn't grow in your courtyard. Your basket is now heavy, your coin purse lighter, and you're mentally calculating whether you've stayed within budget or slightly exceeded it again. The walk home requires vigilance. Crowded markets attract pickpockets and thieves. You keep your basket close, your remaining coins closer, and you're alert to being jostled or distracted. Rome is mostly safe during daylight, but mostly isn't entirely, and losing your shopping to a skilled thief means starting over or going without. Back home, you unpack your purchases into your storage areas, grateful the expedition is done for today. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. Recalibrated word count targets and progressed through section 7. Again went over 1,000. Let me aim for 950, 970 for the next sections, continuing with section 7. Section 7, the triclinium, your dining room, is where Roman social theatre happens, and preparing it for a proper meal is choreography that would exhaust a modern event planner. You're converting an empty room into a stage set for conspicuous consumption, where the food itself is almost secondary to the performance of wealth, culture, and social dominance. And it all has to look effortless, even though you're about to sweat through several hours of setup, service, and cleanup. The room's defining feature is 3 couches arranged in a U-shape around a central space where tables and servants will circulate. These aren't couches in the modern sense. They're solid, heavy platforms covered with mattresses and cushions, sloping slightly so diners can recline on their left side, prop themselves up on their left elbow and eat with their right hand. Each couch fits 3 people, meaning your standard triclinium seats 9 diners. This reclining position is mandatory for formal Roman dining and takes practice to master without sliding off, dropping food on yourself, or looking like an uncultured barbarian. First, you need to dress the couches. The mattresses get covered with your best linens. These should be clean, remember that miserable laundry process? And preferably decorated with purple stripes or expensive dyes if you're showing off. Then cushions get arranged for back support and elbow propping. The placement matters. The most honoured couch is the one directly opposite the room's entrance, and the most honoured position on that couch is the right-hand spot. You're literally mapping social hierarchy onto furniture placement. Next come the small individual tables, mensae, that will hold each diner's dishes. These are low, portable tables, usually made of wood or expensive stone if you're wealthy. They slide in front of each couch position, and you're arranging them now, checking that they're stable, clean, and positioned correctly. Wobbly tables during a dinner party are embarrassing. Having a table collapse and dump food on an important guest is a social disaster you'll never live down. Now the dishes themselves need staging. You're setting out your best bronze or pottery serving platters, your drinking cups, glass if you're wealthy, ceramic if you're not, spoons, the Romans used spoons but not forks, and those little finger bowls for washing hands between courses. Roman dining is hands-on. You eat with your fingers, tearing food and dipping it in sauces, so regular hand washing is essential. You arrange everything within easy reach for the servers who will be shuttling food from the kitchen. Here's your mainstream fact. Elite Roman dinner parties, ceni, were marathon social events lasting hours, featuring multiple courses, entertainment between dishes, and enough food to make modern Thanksgiving look restrained. The truly wealthy might serve 7 courses, each more elaborate than the last, with exotic ingredients imported from across the empire. Dormice cooked in honey, flamingo tongues, peacocks served in their own feathers reconstructed for dramatic presentation. Your average middle-class cena is considerably simpler, but the basic structure remains. Appetizers, gustaccio, main courses, primi mensae, and dessert, secundi mensae. The lighting needs attention. You've positioned oil lamps around the room, more than usual because evening dining means you need enough light for people to see what they're eating. Without being so bright, it feels like an interrogation. The lamps need filling, the wicks need trimming, and you're doing this now rather than scrambling later when guests arrive and everything becomes chaotic. Your quirky detail, seating arrangements at Roman dinner parties could make or break social relationships. Putting someone in a lower prestige position was a deliberate insult. Seating enemies too close together invited conflict. The host had to navigate relationships, hierarchies, and social obligations with every placement decision, and Romans absolutely noticed and gossiped about who sat where. Wine service requires preparation. You've got craters, large mixing bowls, where wine will be mixed with water. The Romans almost never drank wine straight. They considered that barbaric. The ratio varies from 1 part wine to 3 parts water for polite company to equal parts for those who want to get seriously drunk. You're staging multiple craters with ladles, plus jugs of water, plus the wine amphorae themselves which need to be accessible, but not cluttering the dining space. If you're serving a formal meal, there's also entertainment to consider. Wealthy Romans hired musicians, dancers, even poets to perform between courses. You're probably not that fancy, but you still might have someone playing the lyre quietly in the background, creating ambiance. The instrument needs tuning, the musician needs a place to sit that's out of the way but still visible, and you're coordinating this along with everything else. The temperature of the room matters too. It's evening, possibly cool, so you've lit braziers to keep diners comfortable, but not so many that the room becomes stifling, and positioned so servants can move around them without accidents. and monitored so they don't tip over and burn your house down. Fire safety while hosting is a legitimate concern. Historians still argue whether Romans actually enjoyed reclining while eating, or if it was purely social convention. The physical position looks elegant but is actually awkward. Your arm goes numb, food falls on the couch, and you can't eat as much because you're half lying down. But wealthy Romans absolutely looked down on people who sat upright to eat like peasants or barbarians. The final setup involves briefing your household staff or enslaved workers who'll be serving. They need to understand the order of courses, which dishes go to which positions, when to refill wine, how to remove empty dishes discreetly, and how to respond to the inevitable demands from guests. A well-trained serving staff makes everything look effortless. Poorly trained staff creates visible chaos that reflects badly on the host. You step back and survey your work. The triclinium is transformed from empty room to elegant dining stage. Now you just need the food to be ready, the guests to arrive on time, and nothing to go catastrophically wrong during service. What could possibly go wrong? Let's talk about something Romans tried very hard not to talk about: the daily reality of human waste management. Your household produces refuse, human and otherwise, constantly, and dealing with it is simultaneously essential, disgusting, and weirdly sophisticated for a pre-industrial society. You're facing the morning's first chamber pot check, and the smell hits you before you even enter the bedroom. Roman houses don't have indoor plumbing in the modern sense, though wealthy homes sometimes have latrines connected to sewer lines. For everyone else, which is most people, you've got chamber pots. These ceramic or bronze vessels sit in bedrooms and are used at night when nobody wants to venture outside to the public latrines or risk navigating dark streets to answer nature's call. By morning, they're full, they're heavy, and they're your problem. You carry the chamber pot carefully through the house, toward your cesspit, if you have one, or toward the street if you don't. The cesspit is basically a lined pit in your courtyard or under your house, where waste accumulates until it needs to be emptied by professional cesspit cleaners. It's supposed to be sealed to prevent seepage, but that's more hope than guarantee. Many Roman houses have mysterious damp spots in walls or floors where nobody wants to investigate too closely, because the answer might be, your neighbour's sewage is leaking through. If you don't have a private cesspit, and many Romans don't, you're taking your chamber pot to the street and dumping it into the gutter. This is technically illegal. Rome has laws about dumping waste from windows or doors during certain hours, but enforcement is spotty, and the practical reality is that Rome's streets are partially open sewers, especially in lower-rent neighbourhoods. The city slopes toward the Tiber River, and gravity does most of the work of moving waste downhill and away. Eventually. Here's your mainstream fact. Rome's famous Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, is one of the world's oldest continuously used sewage systems, originally built as an open channel to drain the forum's marshy ground and later covered over and expanded. Public latrines connect to it, and some wealthy private homes tap into it, but the system doesn't cover the entire city. Many areas rely on cesspits, street drainage, and hope. The public latrines themselves are worth mentioning. They're communal affairs, rows of stone or wood seats with holes, positioned over flowing water channels that carry waste away. No privacy stalls, no doors, just you sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers while conducting your business, and possibly chatting about politics or sports. The Romans were remarkably unbothered by this setup. What did bother them was the cleaning method. A sponge on a stick, the tersorium, that sat in a bucket of vinegar or salt water between uses and was shared by everyone. You really don't want to think too hard about the bacterial situation there. Your quirky detail, the Phallonica, those laundries we discussed earlier, paid good money for urine collected in public urns, but they weren't the only customers. Farmers bought urine as fertilizer. Tanners used it in leather processing. Ancient Rome had a thriving urine economy, which makes you reconsider the phrase liquid assets. Back to your household waste. In addition to human waste, you've got food scraps, broken pottery, worn-out textiles, and general garbage accumulating daily. The Romans didn't have organized garbage collection in the modern sense. Wealthy neighborhoods might have slaves who dealt with trash. Poor neighborhoods had people who hauled refuse to dumps outside the city walls. Massive trash mountains that archaeologists love because they're full of preserved artifacts. You're sorting your garbage with practiced efficiency. Anything burnable goes in a pile for the kitchen fire. Broken pottery, and Romans broke a lot of pottery, goes in another pile for disposal. Food scraps that are appropriate for animals might be saved if you keep chickens or pigs. Everything else gets dumped. The animal waste is another consideration if your household includes any livestock. Many urban Romans kept chickens in their courtyards for eggs, and cleaning the chicken coop is exactly as fun as it sounds. Some people kept pigs, which could eat garbage and eventually be eaten themselves. Wealthy estates with stables have whole teams dealing with horse manure. All of this needs daily management unless you want your home to smell like a barn. Historians still argue whether Roman urban areas were actually as clean as elite writers sometimes claim, or if those claims were propaganda covering a smellier reality. Archaeological evidence suggests both. Some areas with good drainage and active maintenance were probably reasonably clean by ancient standards, while other areas, especially the poorer insula, were probably disgusting by any standards. The bathing water presents another waste issue. If you have a small bathhouse in your home, or even just a bathing room, the used water needs to go somewhere. It's not clean enough to reuse for drinking or cooking, but it's valuable enough that you hate to waste it completely. Some people use it for watering gardens or cleaning floors. Others just dump it into the street drainage system and let the city worry about it. One particularly nasty task is cleaning the kitchen's grease traps and drainage. Cooking produces substantial amounts of fatty waste, and it accumulates in the channels that drain water from your food prep areas. This gets scraped out periodically, sludgy, rancid, and absolutely foul-smelling. The ancient equivalent of unclogging a modern kitchen drain, but without the benefit of drain cleaner or plumber's snakes. By the time you've finished your morning waste management rounds, chamber pots emptied, garbage sorted, cesspits checked, and kitchen drains dealt with, you need to wash your hands thoroughly. The Romans used oil and strigils or sometimes soap made from animal fat and wood ash. You scrub carefully, because you know from experience that skipping this step leads to intestinal problems that can last for days. The endless battle against filth continues. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. Light and heat in a Roman household isn't a switch flip away. It's a full-time logistics operation that requires planning, procurement, and constant vigilance against running out of fuel, or, worse, accidentally burning your house down. You're managing a portfolio of fire sources, each with its own demands, and the stakes are simultaneously trivial. You want to see at night, and existential. Roman cities burn with terrifying frequency. Your primary light source after dark is the oil lamp, and you've got dozens of them scattered throughout your house. They're simple technology, a clay or bronze vessel with a reservoir for olive oil, a spout for the wick, and occasionally a handle for carrying. The wick is usually linen or papyrus, and it burns slowly, consuming oil and producing a flickering yellow light that's barely adequate by modern standards. Stand next to a Roman oil lamp sometime and try to read. Your eyes will hurt within minutes. The daily oil lamp routine starts with checking fuel levels. You move through the house, lifting each lamp, swishing the oil to gauge how much remains. Empty lamps get refilled from your household olive oil supply. And yes, this is the same oil you cook with, though some people use cheaper grades for lamps. Pouring oil into a small reservoir opening without spilling requires steady hands and practice. Spilled oil is wasted money and a slip hazard on your nice mosaic floors. Next, the wicks need attention. They burn down over time, developing crusty carbon deposits that produce more smoke and less light. You trim them with small scissors or pinch off the burned portions, trying to maintain a wick length that burns efficiently. Too long and it smokes excessively. Too short and it drowns in oil. You develop an intuitive sense for correct wick length the way modern people develop intuition for phone battery management. Here's your mainstream fact. Wealthy Roman households burned through staggering quantities of olive oil for lighting. A large villa might use hundreds of gallons per year just for lamps, making lighting a significant household expense. The poor made do with fewer lamps, longer periods of darkness, and cheaper oil that burned dirtier. The truly desperate sometimes used tallow candles made from animal fat, which produced even worse smoke and smell. Your quirky detail, Roman lamps came in endless decorative varieties, erotic scenes, religious images, gladiator fights, theatre masks. You're lighting your home with tiny clay pornography and mythological illustrations. Some collectors paid premium prices for particularly artistic or rare lamp designs, turning functional objects into status symbols. The charcoal supply requires more strategic thinking. Charcoal is expensive, wood burned in controlled conditions to produce pure carbon fuel that burns hot and relatively clean. You store it in a dry location, usually a covered basket or pottery vessel, because damp charcoal is useless. Your household goes through charcoal constantly. Cooking fires, braziers for heat, occasionally for laundry water heating or bathing water. Running out means either cold meals or an emergency trip to buy more at inflated prices from a neighbourhood dealer who knows you're desperate. Wood is an alternative fuel, though it's less popular for indoor use because it's smokier and requires more storage space. Some households keep a wood supply for outdoor cooking or for heating larger spaces. You're constantly calculating fuel economy. Is charcoal worth the premium for its heat and cleanliness, or should you burn cheaper wood and tolerate more smoke? The braziers, those portable heating units that make Roman homes tolerable in winter, need constant feeding. They're basically metal or ceramic bowls on stands, filled with burning charcoal and positioned around your home for warmth. Each one is a minor fire hazard requiring supervision. They need refueling every few hours. They need to be positioned where they won't be knocked over by careless movement or pets. They produce carbon monoxide, so you need some ventilation unless you want to poison your household gradually. Historians still argue about how cold Roman homes actually got in winter. Italy has a Mediterranean climate, so winters are milder than Northern Europe, but it still gets genuinely cold at night. Without central heating or insulation, your house is basically outdoor temperature plus whatever heat you can generate from your braziers and kitchen fire. Wealthy Romans, with their heated floors, hypocaust systems circulating hot air under tiles, were comfortable. Everyone else was cold. The kitchen fire is its own maintenance project. You keep it burning as continuously as possible during waking hours because restarting from cold is time-consuming and frustrating. Before bed, you bank the fire, carefully arranging coals and ash to slow combustion overnight, so you'll have live coals to restart from in the morning. This requires skill. Too aggressive, and the fire goes out. Completely. Too conservative, and it burns through your fuel wastefully. Fire safety is not paranoia, it's survival. Roman cities burn regularly. The city of Rome itself experienced massive fires multiple times, most famously in 64 CE under Nero. Individual house fires are even more common. Your building materials are a mix of stone, wood and clay, with timber support beams, wooden furniture, and textile hangings that are absolutely ready to burn at the slightest provocation. You maintain constant awareness of your open flames, never leaving braziers unattended in rooms where someone might knock them over, keeping flammable materials away from cooking fires, and always having water nearby for emergency dousing. The evening lighting ritual begins as the sun sets. You move through your house, lighting lamps from a single carried flame, creating pools of yellow light that push back the darkness but never fully defeat it. The shadows flicker and dance. Dark corners remain dark. Moving between rooms requires carrying a lamp unless you know the layout well enough to navigate by memory. It's atmospheric in a way modern electric lighting can never replicate, but it's also limiting, slightly eerie, and constantly reminding you that darkness is the default state, and light is a resource you must actively maintain. By bedtime, you've trimmed wicks, refilled oil, managed braziers, tended the kitchen fire, and calculated tomorrow's fuel needs. The cycle never ends. Light and warmth require eternal vigilance. Children in a Roman household are simultaneously treasured family members and noisy chaos generators who require constant supervision, education, and correction if you want them to grow into respectable adults rather than embarrassing the family at every social gathering. You're juggling multiple young bodies with different needs, abilities, and levels of obedience, and somehow you're supposed to turn them into productive members of Roman society, while also keeping them alive and preventing them from destroying your house. Morning childcare starts early. Young children wake up with the sun, or before it, and they wake up ready to cause problems. You're getting them dressed in their small tunics, making sure they've visited the chamber pot, checking for obvious dirt or injury, and preparing breakfast that they'll inevitably complain about. Roman children eat essentially the same meals as adults, but in smaller portions. Porridge, bread, maybe some honey or dried fruit if you're not poor. Getting them to eat without flinging food or fighting with siblings is its own challenge. If you have infants or toddlers, the logistics multiply exponentially. Diapers don't exist in the modern sense. You're using cloth wrappings that need constant changing and washing. Breastfeeding is standard, either by the mother or a wet nurse if the family's wealthy enough. Babies cry, need feeding every few hours, and require constant carrying or supervision. You've fashioned a sling or carrier to keep the baby close while you work, because setting an infant down in a Roman home with its open fires, hard floors and various hazards is asking for disaster. Toddlers are mobile disasters. They're old enough to move around but lack any judgment about danger. You're constantly pulling them back from the cistern, away from the kitchen fire, out of the storage rooms where they might knock over valuable amphorae. Child mortality in ancient Rome is horrifically high. Somewhere between a quarter and a third of children die before age 10, and accidents account for many of those deaths. You're hyper-vigilant about keeping small children away from the dozens of ways they might hurt themselves. Here's your mainstream fact. Education for Roman children was highly stratified by class and gender. Wealthy boys received formal education from private tutors called pedagogues, learning reading, writing, arithmetic, rhetoric, and Greek. Wealthy girls got more limited education focused on skills needed for household management. Poor children got essentially no formal education. They learned trades or household skills through hands-on experience and apprenticeship. Your middle-class household probably falls somewhere in between. Boys might attend a local school, a ludus, run by a grammaticus who charges fees to teach basic literacy and numeracy. These schools are not pleasant environments. Corporal punishment is standard educational methodology, and the phrase, spare the rod and spoil the child, has Roman precedence. You're sending your son off each morning with his wax tablets and stylus, hoping he'll actually learn something and not just get beaten for misbehavior. Girls stay home more often, learning household management from their mothers. You're teaching your daughter to spin wool, basic cooking, how to manage enslaved workers, social graces for dinner parties, and all the skills she'll need to run her own household eventually. This education is hands-on and constant. She's following you through daily chores, watching, imitating, gradually taking on more responsibility. Your quirky detail. Roman children played with toys that would be recognizable today. Dolls, balls, hoops, knucklebones, basically dice, small carts and toy animals. Wealthy children had elaborate dolls made of ivory or clay with movable limbs. Poor children had simple wooden toys or improvised playthings. The impulse to give children toys transcends era and culture. Childcare also involves teaching behavior and social expectations. Roman children were expected to be seen and not heard in public, to show appropriate deference to elders, to behave respectfully at religious ceremonies and social gatherings. You're constantly correcting, stop that, sit still, greet your uncle properly. No, we don't do that. The goal is producing children who reflect well on the family's dignity and status. The disciplinary methods available to you range from verbal correction to physical punishment, and Roman parents did not hesitate to use corporal punishment when they felt it necessary. Beating children was considered normal parenting, not abuse. The paterfamilias, the male head of household, technically had the legal power of life and death over his children, though actually exercising that power was extremely rare and socially condemned except in extreme circumstances. Historians still argue about whether Roman parents actually felt affection for their children in the way modern parents do, or if high child mortality led to more emotional distance. The evidence is mixed. We have touching grave inscriptions mourning dead children, but we also have philosophical writings suggesting parents should maintain emotional control and not grieve excessively. The reality was probably that Roman parents loved their children but expressed that love differently, and prepared for potential loss in ways that seem cold to modern sensibilities. Keeping children entertained while you work is an ongoing challenge. You can't just turn on a screen and zone them out for a few hours. Instead, you give them small tasks. Help me sort these beans. Watch your little sister while I cook. Go fetch water from the courtyard. These tasks keep them busy while teaching useful skills. When work is done, they play in the courtyard, supervised, because unsupervised play leads to accidents, fights, or children wandering off into dangerous streets. Sick children are particularly difficult. Roman, medicine for children was limited and often actively harmful. You have access to folk remedies, prayers to the appropriate gods, and hope. A child with fever might be treated with herbs, cooling baths, or amulets. A child with a bad cough gets honey, steam inhalation, or prayers to healing deities. You're doing your best with the tools available, which by modern standards is almost nothing. By evening, you've fed children multiple times, broken up fights, cleaned up messes, administered discipline, provided basic education, tended minor injuries, and orchestrated the complex ballet of keeping multiple small humans alive and reasonably civilized. Tomorrow you'll do it all again, and continue daily until they're old enough to take on adult responsibilities themselves, or get married off to start the cycle anew in their own households. The rhythmic clack of the loom and the endless spinning of wool define Roman domestic femininity so thoroughly that respectable women are practically judged by their textile production. You're sitting down, finally a seated task, but your hands are never idle, because wool work is the acceptable, expected, and essentially mandatory occupation for any woman who wants to maintain social respectability. The Emperor Augustus reportedly made his own family spin and weave to demonstrate traditional Roman values. You don't have that political dimension, but you absolutely have the social expectation that you'll be producing cloth constantly. Your raw material is wool from the household sheep if you're rural, or purchased fleeces if you're urban. The fleeces arrive filthy, greasy with lanolin, full of dirt and vegetable matter. The first step is sorting, separating good quality wool from poor, pulling out obvious debris, organising by colour if you're lucky enough to have natural colour variation. This happens in your courtyard because the fleece smells like sheep and carries dust that you don't want indoors. Next comes washing, which is exactly as tedious as it sounds. You're soaking wool in warm water, working it gently to remove grease and dirt without felting the fibres into useless mats. This takes multiple rinses, careful handling, and a lot of water. More water hauling, your shoulders are never getting a break. The washed wool gets spread in the sun to dry, fluffed occasionally to prevent matting, and monitored against theft because clean wool is valuable. Once dry, you card or comb the wool, pulling it through specialized tools with metal or wooden teeth that align the fibers and remove remaining debris. This prepares it for spinning by creating fluffy, organized clumps of fiber called rovings. Your hands develop calluses in specific spots from gripping the carding combs, and you develop a mind-numbing rhythm. Pull, flip, for hours, processing pounds of wool into something usable. Now comes spinning, the truly endless part. You're using a drop spindle, a weighted stick that hangs from twisted fibre, and rotates to add twist that turns fluffy wool into strong thread. The technique is simple but requires constant attention. Draft out fibres from your roving with one hand, set the spindle spinning with the other, control the twist so it's even and strong, win the finished thread onto the spindle shaft when it gets too long to manage, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. A skilled spinner can maintain almost meditative rhythm, working while talking, supervising children, or just zoning out mentally while hands maintain automatic motion. Here's your mainstream fact. Wool production was so central to Roman domestic life that the epitaph, "She kept the house and made wool," appears on countless tombstones as the highest praise for a respectable woman. Cloth production wasn't just practical, it was moral. Women who didn't work wool were suspected of laziness or worse. The quantities are staggering. A single tunic requires maybe 2 to 3 pounds of finished yarn. A toga requires perhaps 15 to 20 pounds. Your household needs clothing for multiple people, linens for beds and tables, towels, cleaning rags, and repairs for worn garments. You're spinning for hours daily just to maintain your household's textile needs, never mind if you're producing cloth to sell or trade. Your quirky detail. Some wealthy Roman women kept spinning equipment made from exotic materials, spindle whorls carved from amber or ivory, distaffs decorated with precious metals. Turning utilitarian tools into luxury items was a way to signal wealth, while still performing the socially expected textile work. You're spinning wool on equipment that costs more than some people's annual income. The weaving comes next, and this requires a loom, a large stationary piece of equipment that's a permanent fixture in your home. Roman looms were typically vertical, with warp threads hanging from a top beam weighted at the bottom with clay or stone weights. You create fabric by passing weft threads horizontally through the vertical warp, building cloth row by row. It's physically demanding work, reaching overhead to the top of the loom, crouching to work at the bottom, beating the weft threads into place with a wooden sword or beater, maintaining even tension. The weaving process is slow. A skilled weaver might produce a few inches of cloth per hour, depending on thread weight and fabric density. A single toga takes weeks of full-time weaving. You're standing at this loom for hours each day, sometimes with other women, sometimes alone, always working. Your back aches, your arms tire, but the cloth grows slowly, and that growth represents genuine economic value and social credit. Historians still argue whether Roman textile production was actually as continuous and mandatory as literary sources suggest, or if this was an idealized version of domestic life that didn't match reality. Archaeological evidence of spindle whirls and loom weights in virtually every Roman home suggests that, yes, most households really did produce their own textiles. The cloth colour matters. Natural wool comes in shades of white, grey, brown, and black, depending on the sheep. White wool can be dyed. Expensive dyes like purple from murex snails cost a fortune and are restricted by sumptuary laws, but cheaper vegetable dyes are accessible. Most household cloth stays natural, but you might dye some wool for decorative borders or special garments. Pattern weaving adds another complexity level. Simple stripes are achievable by alternating coloured threads. More complex patterns require careful thread counting and sophisticated understanding of how over-under weaving creates visible designs. The most elaborate fabrics, with geometric patterns or pictorial elements, require professional weavers working on specialised looms, but simpler decorative elements are within household production capabilities. When the cloth comes off the loom, it needs finishing, fulling to tighten the weave, shearing to remove loose fibres and create smooth surface, sometimes raising the nap for warmer fabrics. Some of this you can do at home with shears and careful brushing. More intensive finishing requires sending cloth to professional fullers, adding cost. The finished cloth gets stored carefully, folded and placed in chests with aromatic herbs to discourage moths. Because yes, after all this work, months of spinning and weaving, moths can destroy your textile investment in weeks if you're not vigilant. By the time you've finished your daily textile quota, maybe 2 hours of spinning, an hour of weaving, your hands are cramped, your back is stiff, and you're already calculating tomorrow's work. The spinning never ends. The loom always has more warp threads waiting for weft. The wool work is eternal. If your household includes enslaved workers, and if you're anything above desperately poor, it probably does, you're managing human beings who have no choice about being there, no legal rights, no ability to refuse, and every reason to resent you. This creates a management challenge that combines labour coordination, psychological manipulation, and the constant threat of punishment to maintain a system that's fundamentally built on violence and exploitation. Roman slavery is not some gentle domestic servitude. It's institutionalized ownership of people, and you're the one running the system in your home. Your morning begins with assigning tasks. If you own just 1 or 2 enslaved people, their duties are general: cleaning, cooking, water hauling, shopping assistance, childcare, whatever needs doing. If you're wealthier with a larger household, you've got specialized workers. The atriensis manages the entrance hall and greets visitors. The ostiarius guards the door, the cocus cooks, the cubicularius handles bedrooms, the pediceci carry things and run errands. You're coordinating this team, making sure everyone knows their responsibilities, and checking that work is done, to standard. The management style ranges from relatively decent, providing adequate food, accepting reasonable work pace, limiting physical punishment, to absolutely brutal, constant beatings, starvation rations, sexual exploitation. Your approach probably falls somewhere in the middle. You're not deliberately cruel, but you're also comfortable using physical punishment when you think it's warranted, and you definitely don't see enslaved people as fully human in the way free Romans are. Here's your mainstream fact. Historians estimate that at Rome's height, somewhere between 20–40% of Italy's population was enslaved. This wasn't some marginal institution. It was the foundation of the Roman economy and domestic life. Virtually every middle-class and wealthy household owned enslaved people, and even poor free Romans often owned at least one person to handle the most unpleasant tasks. The daily oversight is constant. You're checking that the atrium was swept properly, that water was hauled in sufficient quantity, that shopping purchases weren't skimmed, enslaved people sent shopping sometimes stole small amounts, that meals are being prepared correctly, that children are being supervised adequately. You're looking for shirking, theft, or insubordination, because enslaved workers have every incentive to do minimum necessary work and maximum covert resistance. Resistance takes many forms. Open rebellion is rare, too dangerous, but subtle resistance is constant. Working slowly when not supervised, claiming not to understand instructions, breaking things accidentally, stealing small amounts of food or household goods, spreading gossip or creating household conflict. You're trying to identify and correct these behaviors without creating so much resentment that you trigger something worse. Punishment is your primary management tool, and Roman law gives you almost unlimited authority to punish enslaved people however you choose. Light infractions might get verbal reprimands. More serious issues get beatings, with a stick, a whip, or your hand, delivered immediately to establish dominance and deter repetition. Severe offences might result in being sold to worse conditions, sent to work in mines or on galleys, or even execution, though killing enslaved people is expensive and usually reserved for serious crimes like attempting to harm the owner. Your quirky detail. Some Roman households maintained informal courts, where enslaved workers could bring complaints against each other, and the owner served as judge. This created an illusion of fairness while actually reinforcing the owner's absolute power and dividing enslaved people against each other instead of uniting them against the system. The economics matter to you. Enslaved people are expensive capital investments. Purchasing an adult costs roughly the equivalent of a year's wages for a middle-class Roman. You need to maintain their health and productivity, because a dead or incapacitated worker represents significant financial loss. This creates a perverse incentive structure where you're motivated to keep them alive and functional, but not necessarily happy or comfortable. Feeding enslaved workers is your responsibility. They get simpler, cheaper food than free household members, more porridge, less meat, fewer luxuries, but enough to maintain working capacity. Starvation is counterproductive. You want workers with energy. Clothing is minimal, simple tunics, maybe 2 per person per year, plus basic shoes or sandals. Housing is whatever space you can spare, often a small room, or even just sleeping mats in work areas. Some enslaved people in your household might have specialized skills that increase their value and improve their treatment. A trained cook, an educated secretary who handles correspondence, a skilled craftsperson, these workers get better treatment because they're harder to replace. You're more careful with valuable specialists than with general laborers doing work anyone could do. The sexual dimension is impossible to ignore. Roman law gave owners absolute sexual access to enslaved people, and this was considered normal and unremarkable. Enslaved women face systematic sexual exploitation. Enslaved men might be exploited by owners of any gender. The children born from these encounters were enslaved from birth, adding to the owner's property. You might be participating in this system or looking the other way while your husband does, and Roman society considered this perfectly acceptable. Historians still argue whether enslaved people in domestic settings experienced better conditions than those in agriculture or mining, or if that's a false comparison that minimizes the horror of the entire system. Domestic slavery might not be as immediately deadly as mine work, but it's still violent, exploitative, and strips people of fundamental humanity and autonomy. Some enslaved workers in your household might be relatively well treated by Roman standards, adequate food, rare beatings, reasonable work expectations, while others face constant abuse. The variation depends on personality compatibility, work performance, and your mood on any given day. This arbitrariness is itself a form of psychological torture, never knowing whether today will be bearable or terrible. Manumission, freeing enslaved people, is possible but not guaranteed. Some owners free workers in their wills as reward for loyal service. Others free specific individuals for various reasons. But many enslaved people work their entire lives without ever being freed, and their children remain enslaved, perpetuating the system across generations. By the time you've finished your morning management rounds, assigning tasks, checking work, delivering one beating for shirking, and one verbal warning for substandard cleaning, you've reinforced the daily reality that your household's functioning depends on people you own, doing work they didn't choose under threat of violence they can't escape. The household gods, lares, penates, and the genius of your family require daily attention that blurs the line between religious devotion and household chore. Your lararium shrine isn't a weekend church service situation. It's a daily obligation that keeps your home protected from spiritual threats, bad luck, and the vague sense that you've angered the divine powers that control everything from harvests to home invasions. You're maintaining a relationship with supernatural forces through ritual offerings that are simultaneously sincere belief, cultural expectation, and insurance policy against cosmic bad luck. Your lararium is a small shrine built into the wall of your atrium or positioned prominently near the household hearth, the spiritual and literal heart of the home. It might be an elaborate marble edicula, miniature temple structure, if you're wealthy, or a simple painted niche if you're not. Inside, you keep small statues or painted images of the protective deities, the lares, twin guardian spirits shown dancing with drinking horns, the penates, protectors of the household pantry and food supply, and sometimes the family genius, the protective spirit of the paterfamilias, represented as a snake or human figure. The morning offering ritual is quick but must be done correctly. You've set aside small portions of food, bread from breakfast, a bit of first fruits from any newly opened food stores, maybe some honey or a handful of grain. You approach the lararium with appropriate reverence, place the offerings on the shrine's small altar, and speak a brief prayer asking for continued protection, prosperity, and household harmony. Some households light a small oil lamp or burn a pinch of incense. You're making sure the household gods know they're appreciated and fed, because hungry or neglected gods are dangerous gods. Here's your mainstream fact. The lararium ritual was so fundamental to Roman domestic life that even the poorest households maintained some version of it. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows lararia in virtually every home, from massive villas to tiny shops with cramped living quarters. The specific forms varied, but the practice was universal. Everyone fed their household gods. The offerings accumulate throughout the day. Before meals, you dedicate a small portion to the lares and penates, sometimes literally placing food on the shrine, sometimes symbolically. Special occasions merit special offerings, a splash of wine after receiving good news, additional food on family birthdays, extra devotion before important events like weddings or business ventures. You're maintaining an ongoing transactional relationship. Provide offerings, receive protection. Your quirky detail, the genius of the paterfamilias, was celebrated on his birthday with special offerings, essentially treating the head of household's guardian spirit like a mini deity. This reinforced patriarchal authority by giving it divine dimensions. Disrespecting the paterfamilias meant offending not just a human, but his personal protective spirit. The household also honors other domestic deities beyond the standard lararium trio. Vesta, goddess of the hearth, receives attention whenever you tend the kitchen fire. Janus, god of doorways and transitions, gets invoked when you leave or enter the home for important journeys. Specific rooms might have their own minor protective spirits that get occasional recognition. You're navigating a crowded spiritual landscape where almost every household function has divine dimensions. Cleaning the lararium is another maintenance task. The offerings decay, bread goes stale, milk sours, flowers wilt, and you can't leave rotting food at the shrine. Old offerings get carefully removed, not just tossed in the garbage, that would be disrespectful. The shrine's surface gets wiped clean, and the statues or paintings get dusted. This happens every few days, balancing reverence with practicality. Some families maintain elaborate ritual calendars tracking specific days sacred to household gods, days requiring special offerings, and seasonal festivals. You're coordinating these religious obligations with your regular household schedule, making sure important days aren't forgotten. Missing a significant offering day could explain later misfortunes. The business failed because we forgot to honor the lares on their feast day. Historians still argue whether Romans genuinely believed in household gods' literal existence and power, or if this was more cultural tradition maintained without deep faith. The evidence suggests a mix. Some people were genuinely devout, others were skeptical but practiced anyway for social conformity, and most probably fell somewhere in the middle, not certain the gods were real but not willing to risk finding out by neglecting worship. The superstitions surrounding household religion are elaborate. Bad omens seen near the lararium, a lamp going out spontaneously, offerings disturbed by animals, unusual sounds, get interpreted as warnings from the gods. Good fortune after offerings gets interpreted as divine approval. You're constantly reading meaning into random events, creating narrative connections between your ritual practices and household outcomes. Children learn household religious practices by observation and participation. Even young kids understand that you don't touch the lararium carelessly, that offerings are serious business, that proper respect for household gods is essential. This early religious education instills the piety that Roman society values, while also teaching practical ritual mechanics they'll use in their own households eventually. The household religion intersects with public religion but remains distinct. Your private household gods are your business. Your participation in public festivals and temple cults is civic duty. The two systems coexist without much conflict, though tension emerges when public religious expectations clash with household practices, or when religious communities like early Christians reject traditional household worship entirely. By the time you've finished your daily religious duties, morning offerings placed, prayers spoken, shrine tidied, you've invested maybe 15 minutes in activities that feel simultaneously profound and mundane. You're feeding invisible spirits breakfast, essentially, but it's breakfast that might determine whether your home burns down, your children get sick, or your business fails. In a world with limited understanding of causation and no scientific explanations for random misfortune, the household gods provide narrative framework and illusion of control. Feed them faithfully, and maybe, just maybe, things will turn out okay. Your courtyard garden, assuming you have one, which middle-class and wealthy Romans typically do, is simultaneously a practical resource, a status symbol, and another endless maintenance obligation that requires regular attention unless you want your private oasis to become an overgrown nightmare full of dead plants and stagnant water. The peristyle garden combines the Roman love of controlled nature with their obsession with demonstrating wealth through impractical luxury features, and you're responsible for keeping it looking purposefully designed rather than accidentally abandoned. The basic setup includes a colonnaded walkway surrounding a central garden space, often with a fountain or small pool as the focal point. The plantings are strategic. Herbs for cooking and medicine close to the kitchen entrance, flowers for aesthetics and cutting, possibly some small fruit trees if space allows, and whatever ornamental plants signal good taste and cultivation. This isn't food production agriculture. This is luxury horticulture designed to provide beauty, pleasant scents, and a tranquil private space where household members can retreat from Rome's oppressive urban chaos. Your morning garden check starts with water assessment. That decorative fountain needs to be flowing properly. You check the feed pipes for blockages, make sure water levels in the basin are appropriate, and clean out accumulated debris like fallen leaves or the occasional dead bird. Roman fountain engineering is sophisticated, but it still requires maintenance. The water circulates from your household cistern or private aqueduct connection, and clogs anywhere in the system mean the fountain stops flowing, which looks terrible and defeats the whole expensive point of having one. The plants themselves need daily attention. You're watering anything that looks thirsty, more water hauling, though at least this is just from the cistern to the garden rather than from the public fountain to your house. Mediterranean plants are generally drought-tolerant, but your roses, lilies, and herbs still need regular moisture, especially in summer heat. You're using water jugs or a basic watering system involving channels that distribute water to different garden sections. Nothing is automated. Every plant gets watered because someone physically hauled water to it. Here's your mainstream fact. Wealthy Romans employed specialized garden slaves, topiari, who did nothing but tend gardens and create elaborate landscaping. These workers developed sophisticated pruning techniques, created shaped hedges and topiary, and maintained the manicured appearance that separated elite gardens from common courtyards. If you're middle class, you don't have a topiary specialist. You're doing this yourself or assigning it to general household workers who are already juggling 12 other responsibilities. Pruning is ongoing work. The herbs, rosemary, basil, thyme, mint, sage, need harvesting for kitchen use and regular trimming to prevent woody overgrowth and encourage bushier growth. The roses require deadheading to promote more blooms. Any fruit trees need seasonal pruning to maintain shape and productivity. You're working with shears, cutting strategically, trying to balance plant health with aesthetic appearance. Your quirky detail. Some wealthy Romans created garden rooms, outdoor dining spaces within their peristyles where they could host meals surrounded by plants, fountains, and carefully curated views. This was peak Roman luxury, eating an elaborate meal in your private garden while enslaved workers served you and invisible musicians played in the background. You're probably not that fancy, but the concept informs how you think about your more modest courtyard. Pest management is primitive but necessary. Snails and slugs attack plants, especially tender new growth. You're hand-picking them off in the morning when they're most active, crushing them or feeding them to chickens if you keep any. Aphids cluster on roses and herbs. You spray them off with water or try folk remedies like crushed garlic. Larger pests like birds eating fruit get deterred with nets or scarecrows. You're fighting nature constantly to maintain your artificial garden paradise. The soil needs periodic amendment. Roman agricultural writers like Columella wrote extensively about composting, manuring, and soil improvement. You're adding decomposed plant matter, possibly some animal manure if available, turning and aerating soil in planting beds. This is heavy physical work, digging, mixing, moving soil around, that keeps your garden productive rather than depleted. Seasonal planting cycles mean some parts of the garden change throughout the year. Spring brings certain flowers, summer brings others, fall brings harvest of any fruits or vegetables. You're planning these cycles, starting seeds or transplanting at appropriate times, removing spent plants and replacing them with new ones. The garden is never static. It's constantly evolving through your active management. The fountain and pool require special attention. Algae grows in standing water, especially in warm weather. You're scrubbing the basin periodically, draining and refilling it, or adding whatever folk remedies Romans believed controlled algae, vinegar, certain plants, or just frequent cleaning. Stagnant water also breeds mosquitoes, which are annoying and carry malaria in some regions, though Romans didn't understand the disease transmission mechanism. Historians still argue whether Romans actually spent much time in their peristyle gardens, or if these were primarily showcase spaces for impressing visitors. The architectural evidence suggests both. Gardens were designed for visual impact from main rooms, but also included seating and intimate spaces suggesting actual use. Probably wealthy Romans enjoyed their gardens during pleasant weather and otherwise appreciated them visually through their interior spaces. The courtyard walkways need sweeping, more sweeping, because dirt and dust never stop accumulating anywhere in Rome. Fallen leaves, blown debris, bird droppings, and general grime accumulate on the colonnade floors and walkways. You're maintaining the pristine appearance that signals this is a refined household with standards rather than some neglected property. Any statuary or garden decorations require cleaning. If you have bronze or marble statues in your garden, they need periodic washing to remove accumulated dirt and maintain their appearance. Water features need similar attention. Garden furniture, stone benches or wooden seating, needs checking for damage and occasional repair. By the time you've finished your garden maintenance, watering, pruning, cleaning the fountain, sweeping walkways, dealing with pests, you've spent an hour or more on what amounts to extremely expensive lawn care for people who can afford to dedicate valuable, urban space to decorative plants rather than productive uses. But that's exactly the point. Only people with resources can afford this luxury, and maintaining it signals your family's status and refinement. Bath preparations in your household is a logistical production that requires planning, fuel, labor, and timing. If you want to clean your body before visiting the public baths, or if you're wealthy enough to have a private bathing facility. Romans are obsessed with bathing. It's not just hygiene, it's social activity, relaxation therapy, and status indicator all combined. But creating the conditions for a proper bath requires substantial work that usually falls on household servants, or, if you lack those, on yourself. The basic challenge is this. You need large quantities of hot water, oil for body cleaning, specialized tools for scraping, towels for drying, and clean clothing for afterward. None of this appears magically. Someone has to heat the water, procure the supplies, prepare the bathing space, and coordinate timing so everything is ready when needed. If you're bathing at home, you're managing all of this personally. If you're preparing to visit public baths, you still need to get yourself ready and coordinate with other household members who'll be bathing simultaneously. Water heating is the most labor-intensive part. You need multiple amphorae of water heated to various temperatures, very hot for initial washing, warm for rinsing, cold for the final plunge if you're following the traditional 3-stage bathing sequence. You've started heating water in large bronze cauldrons over your kitchen fire or in a separate heating room if your house has one. This requires constant fire tending, fuel consumption, and careful monitoring to avoid boiling water, dry or letting fires get out of control. The oil preparation is its own task. Romans don't use soap in the modern sense. They use olive oil applied to the body, then scraped off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. The scraping removes the oil plus dirt, sweat, dead skin, and general grime accumulated since the last bath. You're preparing containers of olive oil, decent quality, not the expensive cooking oil but not the cheap lamp fuel either, and making sure strigils are clean and ready. Here's your mainstream fact. Public baths were democratic spaces where rich and poor bathed together, though at different times of day and with different levels of luxury service. Admission was cheap, sometimes just a quadrans, the smallest coin denomination, making regular bathing accessible to virtually all Roman urban residents. This democratization of cleanliness is genuinely remarkable for ancient society. Your quirky detail. Professional bath attendants called capsari specialized in watching bathers' clothing while they bathed, because theft in bathhouses was rampant. Even with guards, losing your clothes to thieves was common enough that it appears in jokes and complaints throughout Roman literature. You're preparing to visit the baths knowing you need to either watch your belongings carefully or accept that your tunic might vanish while you're in the hot room. If you're bathing at home, usually only an option for the wealthy, your house has a private bath suite with multiple rooms mimicking public baths in miniature. A cold room, frigidarium, warm room, tepidarium, and hot room, caldarium. The heating system is a hypocaust, hollow spaces under the floors where hot air from a furnace circulates, warming the rooms and any water basins. Operating this system requires enslaved workers tending the furnace, feeding it fuel constantly, and monitoring temperatures to keep rooms properly heated without becoming dangerously hot. The enslaved bath attendants, capsari or balneari, have to prepare everything. Fill the bathing basins, heat the rooms, set out oils and strigils, lay out clean towels and clothing, and stand ready to assist with actual bathing. Wealthy Romans don't scrape their own backs. They have servants do it. They don't carry their own bathing supplies. Servants handle that. The entire experience is mediated through subordinate labor. For the rest of you preparing to visit public baths, you're gathering your supplies, oil in a small container, strigils, towels, maybe a change of tunic, sandals suitable for wet floors. You're coordinating with other household members about timing. The baths have different hours for men and women, and you need to fit bathing into your daily schedule between other obligations. Afternoon is traditional bathing time, after the day's work is done but before the evening meal. The walk to the public baths is its own social activity. You're joining crowds of neighbours heading to the same destination, possibly chatting, definitely part of a recognisable daily pattern. The bath complex is a massive building complex. Rome has hundreds of public baths ranging from small neighbourhood facilities to enormous imperial bath complexes like the Baths of Caracalla that can accommodate thousands simultaneously. Inside, you pay your minimal admission, leave your clothes with capsari, hopefully they'll still be there when you finish, and enter the bathing sequence. First the tepidarium to acclimate to warmth, then the hot caldarium where you sweat heavily and apply oil, then scraping with strigils, either by yourself or with help from bath attendants or friends, then back to tepidarium, then the cold plunge in the frigidarium. The whole process takes 1 to several hours depending on how social you're feeling. Historians still argue whether Romans actually achieved meaningful cleanliness through oil and scraping, or if this was more about the ritual and social experience than actual hygiene. The oil and scraping method does remove surface dirt and dead skin effectively, though it's not antibacterial like modern soap. Combined with hot water soaking, it's probably reasonably effective cleansing, though public baths with their shared facilities and recycled water were also excellent disease transmission vectors. The post-bath routine requires its own preparation. You've brought clean clothing because you're not wearing sweaty, dirty tunics after bathing. You dry off with towels, more textile maintenance because bath towels need regular washing after absorbing body oils, water and sweat. You oil your skin again, lighter application this time for protection rather than cleaning. You dress, retrieve your belongings, if they weren't stolen, and head home feeling clean, relaxed and temporarily civilized. The whole bathing operation, whether at home or public, requires several hours of preparation, participation and recovery. This is not a quick shower. This is a major daily event that structures your afternoon and evening. But in a culture obsessed with cleanliness and social bathing rituals, it's non-negotiable. You bathe regularly, or you're considered barbaric. The maintenance cost of civilization is measured in heated water and slave labor. The evening meal, cena, is the main event of the Roman daily dining schedule, and preparing it requires coordinating multiple dishes, managing fires, and timing everything so food arrives hot and the various courses flow smoothly without disastrous gaps or overlaps. This is not throwing a frozen pizza in the oven. This is multi-course orchestration that would challenge modern cooks even with their fancy tools and temperature control. You're working with open fires, limited lighting, primitive equipment, and the pressure of knowing that dinner quality directly reflects on your household status and competence. The menu planning started earlier, probably this morning during shopping, but now you're executing. A typical middle-class cena includes 3 general phases: appetizers, gustatio, to stimulate appetite and establish the meal's tone; main courses, prime mensae, with multiple savory dishes; and dessert, secondae mensae, with fruits, nuts, and sweet items. Wealthy Romans might serve 7 courses with dozens of dishes. You're probably doing something more modest but still substantial, 3 to 5 different preparations that need to be timed correctly. Your kitchen is already smoky and hot from the day's earlier cooking, and now you're building up fires for the evening push. Multiple cooking surfaces are needed simultaneously, one for the sauce-heavy main dish that requires constant stirring, another for simpler preparations, maybe a third for keeping earlier courses warm while later ones finish. You're managing these fires like a conductor managing an orchestra, adjusting heat levels by adding or removing coals, positioning pots strategically, and hoping nothing burns while you focus on something else. The appetizers might include eggs, boiled, fried, or prepared as omelettes, olives, cheese, raw vegetables with dipping sauces, small fish like anchovies, or whatever else makes sense given your budget and what was available at market. These need to be prepared earlier in the day and assembled attractively on platters when it's time to serve. You're arranging food decoratively because presentation matters. Even simple ingredients should look intentional and refined rather than carelessly thrown together. Here's your mainstream fact. The elaborate banquet meals described in sources like Petronius's Satyricon or Apicius's cookbook represent aspirational elite dining rather than typical daily meals. Most Romans ate simply porridge or bread for breakfast, light lunch, and an evening meal of stew, vegetables, and bread. The exotic multi-course feasts were special occasion dining for the wealthy showing off. The main course demands your focus. You're making a stew or braise, something with meat, vegetables, herbs, and the ubiquitous garum fish sauce. The preparation is straightforward. Brown meat if you're not poor, add chopped vegetables, pour in liquid, water, wine, or stock. Season aggressively with garum, herbs, and possibly honey, or vinegar for sweet-sour balance. Then it simmers for hours, the flavors melding while you tend to everything else. Your quirky detail. Romans loved complex flavor combinations that modern palates might find bizarre. Sweet and savory mixed freely, sour and bitter combined with rich, and everything enhanced with garum. Recipes often call for honey with meat, vinegar with fish, exotic spices with common ingredients. The goal was interesting, memorable flavor rather than letting individual ingredients shine. Bread service requires coordination with the local baker. Most Romans bought bread rather than baking it themselves, and if you want fresh bread for dinner, you need to have sent someone to the bakery at the right time to arrive home with still warm loaves. This requires planning, timing, and hoping the bakery doesn't run out of the good stuff before you get there. Serving the meal is as much performance as logistics. If you have enslaved workers, they're carrying dishes from the kitchen to the dining room, presenting them to diners reclining on their couches, and monitoring whether anything needs replenishment. If you don't have enslaved workers, you're shuttling back and forth yourself, trying to serve graciously while also keeping the kitchen fires managed and the next course progressing. The timing is critical. Serve appetizers too early, and people finish them before the main course is ready, creating awkward waiting. Serve too late and people are hungry and impatient. The main course should arrive while people are satisfied from appetizers but not stuffed. Dessert should come after a pause for digestion. You're managing these intervals while also ensuring hot food stays hot, and cold food stays cold. Well, room temperature, refrigeration doesn't exist. Wine service is constant throughout the meal. You've prepared craters of mixed wine and water, and someone needs to circulate with jugs, refilling drinking cups, responding to requests for different mixing ratios. Some guests want stronger wine, others prefer weaker. You're accommodating preferences while monitoring overall consumption, so nobody gets embarrassingly drunk. Or rather, nobody gets drunk too quickly. Some level of inebriation at dinner parties is expected. Between courses, there might be entertainment. Musicians playing, dancers performing, or just conversation flourishing as the wine flows. You're managing the gaps, keeping things moving without feeling rushed, creating the relaxed but sophisticated atmosphere that defines successful Roman dining. Historians still argue whether Romans actually reclined while eating for every meal, or if reclining was reserved for formal dining while everyday meals used chairs or benches. The evidence suggests reclining was standard for Cena when you wanted to be properly Roman, but less formal dining could happen in more practical positions. The post-meal cleanup begins even as the meal continues. Empty dishes get carried back to the kitchen where they're scraped, stacked, and set aside for washing. Spills get wiped up. The dining room gets a quick sweep if anyone dropped food. You're cleaning as you go to prevent tomorrow from being even more overwhelming. The final dishes, fruits, nuts, cakes sweetened with honey, arrive when the main courses are finished. These are simpler preparations that required less timing precision. People pick at them leisurely while conversation continues, the wine keeps flowing, and the evening transitions from structured meal to social gathering. By the time dinner is completely finished, the last guests have left if you were hosting, or the family has dispersed from the triclinium if it was just household dining. You've been cooking and serving for 4 to 6 hours. You're exhausted, smoke-stained, and facing a kitchen full of dirty dishes and equipment that needs washing. But dinner was successful. Nobody got food poisoning and nothing burned down. Tomorrow you'll do a simplified version for the daily household meal. The day after, maybe another proper cena. The cooking never ends. Food storage in a world without refrigeration, modern preservation techniques or stable supply chains is a constant battle against spoilage, theft, pests, and the basic reality that most things rot faster than you can eat them. Your household storage areas, the pantry, wine cellar, grain room, and various amphora-filled corners are simultaneously your wealth vault and your vulnerability point, requiring daily monitoring, strategic planning, and considerable vigilance to prevent disaster. The primary storage vessel for liquids is the amphora, those pointed-bottom clay jars you've hauled from markets all day. You've got amphora of olive oil, wine, garum, vinegar, honey, and water arranged throughout your storage areas. Each one is heavy even when empty, nearly immovable when full, and somewhat fragile for something holding 50 pounds of valuable liquid. You're checking seals regularly. Amphorae are sealed with clay stoppers or cork and wax, because unsealed containers invite spoilage, evaporation, and opportunistic theft. The grain storage is your most critical food security concern. Wheat, barley, and other grains are staple foods, purchased in bulk when prices are favourable, and stored for months. Your grain is kept in large ceramic jars called dolia, even bigger than amphora, some standing waist high, or in bins in a dedicated storage room. The room is ideally cool, dry, and dark. The reality is you're fighting constant moisture that causes mould, insects that infest and eat the grain, and rodents that view your grain supply as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Insect prevention is constant warfare. Weevils, moths, and grain beetles infest stored grain with depressing reliability. You're checking for signs of infestation, visible insects, damaged kernels, that characteristic musty smell that indicates things have gone wrong. Preventative measures include mixing in bay leaves or other herbs that supposedly repel insects. Romans believed this helped, though effectiveness is questionable. Storing grain in sealed containers and regular inspection to catch problems early. Here's your mainstream fact. Grain storage was so critical to Rome's functioning that the city maintained massive public granaries, the Horea, capable of storing months' worth of grain supply. The grain dole, free grain distributed to citizens, required sophisticated storage infrastructure to prevent spoilage of the quantities needed to feed hundreds of thousands. Your household storage is the private-scale version of this same challenge. Rodent control involves the household cat if you have one. Cats are valued specifically for pest control, or traps and vigilance. Mice and rats eat grain, gnaw through storage containers, contaminate food with droppings, and reproduce faster than you can eliminate them. You're checking for evidence of rodent activity, droppings, gnawed sacks, holes in storage areas, and responding aggressively. Ancient Roman pest control is less effective than modern methods, so you're constantly playing defense. Your quirky detail. Some Romans believed that hanging up dead weasels or using certain moon phase timing for sealing storage containers would prevent spoilage. These folk practices mix genuine observation, seasonal timing does affect storage success, with magical thinking, dead weasels don't actually protect grain. You might follow some of these practices because everyone does, even if you're skeptical. The oil storage requires different attention. Olive oil doesn't spoil as quickly as other foods, but it does go rancid eventually, especially in warm conditions or if exposed to light and air. You're using oil from oldest amphorae first, monitoring smell and taste for signs of rancidity, and storing amphorae in cool, dark areas to extend shelf life. Rancid oil is useless, won't taste good in food and burns badly in lamps, so prevention matters. Wine storage is more forgiving but still requires management. Wine keeps better than most foods, and Romans actually preferred aged wine to fresh in many cases. But storage matters. Amphorae should be positioned properly, usually on their sides in specialized racks, kept at stable temperatures, and monitored for seal integrity. Wine that's exposed to air turns to vinegar, which is useful, but not if you wanted wine. You're tracking which amphorae contain which vintage and quality, using the good stuff for special occasions and the mediocre stuff for daily drinking. Preserved foods need their own attention. Salted meats and fish, dried fruits, vegetables stored in vinegar or oil, cheese, all these have different storage requirements and spoilage timelines. Salt preservation works well but requires enough salt, which is expensive. Drying works if you prevent moisture reabsorption and insect infestation. Pickling in vinegar or oil works until the preserving medium itself spoils. You're monitoring multiple preservation systems simultaneously. Honey is your most reliable preservative. It literally doesn't spoil if kept sealed, and the most expensive. Honey-preserved fruits, honey as sweetener, honey for medicinal purposes. Your honey supply is precious, stored carefully and used judiciously. Thieves particularly target honey, so it's stored in locked areas or under close supervision. Fresh foods present the biggest challenge. Meat must be consumed within a day or two unless salted or smoked. Fish spoils even faster. Vegetables wilt and rot. Fruits ferment or mold. You're constantly calculating what needs to be eaten immediately, what can wait, what should be preserved, and what might be lost to spoilage despite best efforts. Food waste is inevitable, but minimizing it is important both economically and practically. Historians still argue whether Romans actually suffered malnutrition from insufficient diet variety, or whether the archaeological evidence of skeletal health suggests adequate nutrition for most free citizens. The reality probably varied enormously by class. Wealthy Romans ate diversely and abundantly. Poor Romans subsisted on monotonous grain-heavy diets, supplemented by whatever they could afford or forage. The locked storage areas are crucial for security. Valuable foods, expensive spices, honey, best quality wine and oil, are kept in rooms or cabinets that lock, with keys controlled by the household head. This prevents theft by household members. Enslaved workers given access to storage will absolutely steal small amounts. Visiting workers or opportunistic thieves. You're checking locks, managing keys, and balancing security against access convenience. The seasonal storage patterns matter too. After harvest season, you're stocking up on grain, oil, and wine when prices are lowest. Throughout the year, you're drawing down these stores, hoping you've purchased enough to last until the next harvest, without buying at premium out-of-season prices. This requires planning, math, and understanding your household's consumption patterns. By the time you've finished your daily storage check, inspecting grain for insects, checking amphora seals, confirming locks are secure, removing anything that started to spoil, you've confirmed that your household's food security is intact for another day. Tomorrow you'll check again, every day for as long as you manage this household. The vigilance never ends. As evening transitions to night, your household security protocols shift into a different mode entirely. The darkness that's falling over Rome is not the well-lit modern darkness of streetlights and security systems. It's genuine, dangerous darkness broken only by occasional oil lamps, where criminals operate with near impunity, and even a short walk from your door to a neighbor's house becomes an exercise in risk assessment. You're locking up your home like you're preparing for siege, because in practical terms that's not far from reality. The first priority is securing all entry points. Your front door is heavy wood reinforced with iron bands, and you've got a substantial lock mechanism, typically a large key or sliding bolt system that's visible enough to deter casual thieves. You check that the lock engages properly, that the door fits tightly in its frame, and that the hinges are sound. A weak door lock is an invitation to burglary, and Roman thieves are skilled at forced entry. You might wedge additional security, a heavy beam across the door on interior brackets, for extra protection at night. Windows are your next concern. Wealthy homes have some glass windows, but most homes have wooden shutters that close over window openings. You're walking through your house systematically shuttering every opening, checking that latches work, that shutters fit securely, and that no gaps remain that could allow entry or provide surveillance points for thieves planning tomorrow's burglary. Upper story windows get the same treatment. Determined thieves climb walls or use ladders. The courtyard and peristyle areas present special challenges. These open-air spaces can't be fully secured, but you can control access points. Gates or doors leading from the courtyard to the street get locked. Any equipment or valuable items left in the courtyard get stored in locked spaces or moved indoors. Garden tools, portable furniture, anything not fastened down might vanish overnight if left accessible. Here's your mainstream fact. Rome's nighttime crime rate was notorious. Wealthy Romans travelling at night were accompanied by slaves carrying torches and sometimes armed guards. Walking alone at night was genuinely dangerous. Assault, robbery and murder were common enough that people avoided nighttime travel unless absolutely necessary. Your house is an island of security in a city that becomes hostile after dark. If you employ an ostiarius, a doorkeeper slave, he's taking his position now. His job is staying awake all night near the front door, responding to knocks, verifying identities before opening, and raising alarm if anyone attempts unauthorized entry. This is miserable work, staying awake all night every night, sitting in a drafty entrance area, handling the legitimate middle-of-the-night arrivals while deterring illegitimate ones. Many ostiari sleep despite orders not to, accepting the beating they'll receive if caught as preferable to perpetual sleep deprivation. Your quirky detail: some Roman households kept guard dogs. The famous cave canem, beware of dog mosaic from Pompeii, wasn't decorative, it was practical warning. These dogs were often large, aggressive breeds trained to bark at strangers and potentially attack intruders. They were mean, loud, and effective deterrents. You might have one chained near your door or loose in your courtyard, creating a living alarm system. The interior security protocols continue. You're checking that valuables are stored in locked rooms or chests. Jewelry, coins, important documents, expensive portable items, all secured where casual thieves can't access them, even if they breach your outer defenses. Your most precious items might be in a locked strong room, with keys kept on your person or hidden securely. Money management at night time requires special thought. Romans don't have bank accounts in the modern sense. Your savings are physical coins stored at home. This makes you a target if anyone knows you have wealth. Large amounts might be hidden in unexpected locations, under floor tiles, inside wall cavities, buried in the courtyard. Some wealthy Romans used banker-type intermediaries for their real wealth, keeping only small amounts at home. Others trusted no one and created elaborate hiding systems. Fire safety competes with security concerns. You're banking the kitchen fire carefully, arranging coals to burn very slowly overnight, because an extinguished fire means difficult restart tomorrow, but an uncontrolled fire means your house burns down. The braziers in living spaces get extinguished completely or reduced to minimum heat in carefully monitored locations. Oil lamps get extinguished except for 1 or 2 nightlights in critical locations. You're balancing the need for some light against the fire risk of unattended flames. The nighttime supervision of enslaved workers is another consideration. They sleep in their quarters, but you're ensuring they can't easily leave or cause problems overnight. Doors to slave quarters might lock from outside. Valuable items are inaccessible to them. In wealthy households with many enslaved workers, this security concern is substantial. Enslaved people outnumbering the free family members creates potential threat if they organized. The fear of slave rebellion wasn't paranoid fantasy. It was based on real historical revolts like Spartacus. Historians still argue whether Roman urban crime was actually as bad as literary sources suggest, or if wealthy writers exaggerated dangers to justify their protective measures and reinforce class distinctions. Archaeological evidence of door locks, window bars, and defensive architecture suggests yes, security was genuine concern throughout all levels of Roman society. The final checks are psychological as much as practical. You're walking through your secured house, confirming everything is locked, everyone is accounted for, and nothing obviously wrong remains unaddressed. This ritual provides reassurance. You've done what you can to protect your household. Tomorrow might bring break-ins, fires, or disasters despite your precautions, but tonight you've taken reasonable measures. The sleeping arrangements reflect security thinking. The paterfamilias might sleep near the family strong room or in a position where he can respond to threats. Enslaved workers sleep in positions where they can't easily access valuables or exits. Children sleep in supervised areas. Everyone is positioned strategically, even unconsciously, to maintain household security through the vulnerable night hours. Some households maintain watch rotations, enslaved workers taking turns staying awake through the night, walking through the house periodically, checking for fire, listening for suspicious activity. This is exhausting for the workers, but provides real security improvement. In apartment buildings, insulum, residents sometimes organize informal neighborhood watches, sharing security responsibilities collectively. By the time you've finished your security lockdown, doors secured, windows shuttered, valuables locked away, guard dog positioned, doorkeeper stationed, fires managed, you can finally rest. Not fully, though. Part of your mind stays alert through the night, ready to wake at unusual sounds, prepared to respond to emergencies. In ancient Rome, security is never truly off-duty. You sleep, but cautiously, knowing that dawn will bring both relief and the renewal of yesterday's endless routine. The seasons bring their own maintenance emergencies that transcend daily chores into major household projects. Twice a year, typically spring and fall, you're conducting deep cleaning operations that make regular daily maintenance look like casual tidying. This is when you address the accumulated grime, structural issues, textile degradation, and general household deterioration that daily cleaning can't prevent. You're essentially renovating your living space back to acceptable condition, and it's going to take days of exhausting labor. Spring cleaning begins as soon as weather permits. Winter has left your house musty, slightly damp, full of accumulated smoke residue from months of indoor fires and generally depressing. You're opening everything, throwing wide the shutters, propping open doors, letting in fresh air and sunlight that will help dry out moisture and make the scale of necessary work painfully visible. Every surface that looked acceptably clean in winter's dim light now shows its true filthy state under bright sun. The wall washing is your first major project. Roman walls are typically plastered and painted with frescoes if you're wealthy, or plain painted plaster if you're not. Months of smoke from oil lamps, cooking fires, and braziers have left dark deposits. You're mixing up cleaning solutions, water with vinegar or mild lye, and scrubbing walls section by section. This requires ladders, multiple workers if available, and serious arm strength. You work from top to bottom, trying not to create streaky drips that make things look worse. Your quirky detail. Some wealthy Romans repainted their walls annually or biannually, considering fresh paint essential to maintaining proper appearance. This required hiring professional painters, pictories, who charged substantial fees. Most people couldn't afford this, so they washed walls until the paint wore off, then lived with increasingly dingy surfaces until they could save up for repainting. The textile deep clean is enormous. Every piece of fabric in your house needs attention. Bed linens that get washed regularly still need intensive seasonal treatment. Wall hangings that normally just get beaten for dust need full washing. Cushions need their covers washed and filling replaced or fluffed. Woolen blankets need washing, which for wool means careful handling to prevent felting, and beating to remove embedded dirt and discourage insects. You're hauling fabric to washing areas, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, hanging everything in the courtyard until your home looks like a massive laundry operation. The furniture gets moved and cleaned thoroughly. Roman furniture is heavy, bronze couches, marble tables, wooden storage chests, and moving it reveals the dirt accumulated underneath. You're sweeping and mopping these hidden areas, cleaning the furniture itself, checking for structural damage, and oiling wood to prevent drying and cracking. Cushions and mattresses get taken outside, beaten violently with sticks until you've extracted clouds of dust, then ideally resfuffed with fresh materials. Storage areas need complete reorganization. You're emptying your grain storage, checking for insect infestation, cleaning the dolia thoroughly, and either returning good grain or disposing of compromised supplies. Oil amphorae get checked, consolidated, and rearranged. The wine cellar gets inventory, with vinegared wine removed and storage optimized. Every amphora gets lifted, inspected, and repositioned. Your back hates this project by hour 2. Here's your mainstream fact. The Romans actually had a formal spring cleaning tradition called mundus patet. The mundus is open. When the mundus, a ritual pit connecting upper and lower worlds, was ceremonially opened and homes were purified. This mixed religious observance with practical household maintenance, giving divine significance to the cleaning frenzy. The courtyard undergoes major overhaul. You're removing all portable items, sweeping thoroughly, scrubbing the colonnade floors, cleaning the fountain completely, including draining and scrubbing the basin, pruning plants aggressively, replacing any dead specimens, and essentially resetting your garden to presentable condition. Garden furniture gets cleaned, repaired, or replaced. The peristyle columns might get washed if they're particularly smoke-stained. The kitchen receives special attention because it's the dirtiest room by far. You're cleaning behind everything, moving portable items, scrubbing the focus cooking platform until you've removed accumulated burned-on gunk, cleaning pots and pans more thoroughly than daily washing allows, organising stored equipment, and addressing the smoke staining on walls and ceiling. The kitchen never looks truly clean. Too much embedded soot, but you're improving it significantly. The bedroom deep clean involves moving beds, cleaning under them, washing walls, organising stored clothing and personal items, and possibly replacing straw in mattresses if it's gotten compressed or musty. You're checking for bedbugs, endemic problem in Roman sleeping quarters, and treating infestations with whatever folk remedies are believed to work, usually involving herbs or smoke treatment of questionable effectiveness. Historians still argue whether Romans actually did seasonal deep cleaning as universally as sources suggest, or if this was more common among wealthy households with slave labour available. The reality probably varied. Wealthy houses got thorough seasonal maintenance, middle-class houses got whatever the household could manage, and poor insulae apartments got minimal attention because residents lacked resources and landlords didn't care. The full cleaning project is similar but focuses on different concerns. You're preparing for winter, checking that shutters close properly before cold weather arrives, ensuring doors seal well, organising fuel supplies, making sure water storage is adequate and generally weatherproofing. Textiles get a final washing before the weather makes drying difficult. Stored clothing gets reorganised with winter items accessible and summer items put away. The structural inspection happens during these seasonal projects. You're checking for cracks in plaster that need repair, loose roof tiles that need resetting, damaged doors or shutters requiring carpentry, worn-out flooring that needs patching. These aren't daily concerns but become obvious during deep cleaning when you're examining every surface carefully. Addressing small problems now prevents major repairs later. By the time you've finished a seasonal deep clean, anywhere from 3 days to a week of intensive labour, your house looks and smells dramatically better. Everything is cleaner, organised, repaired, and reset to something approaching the condition it was in after the last seasonal cleaning. You're exhausted, every muscle aches, your hands are raw from cleaning solutions and scrubbing, and you're already dreading the next seasonal cleaning in 6 months. But for now, for a brief window, your house is genuinely clean. Enjoy it while it lasts. The day is finally ending. The sun has set completely, darkness has claimed the city outside your shuttered windows, and you're making the final rounds through your household before allowing yourself the luxury of sleep. This is the quiet moment, after all the noise and labour and chaos, where you check that everything is as secure and prepared as possible for the night ahead and the dawn that will inevitably arrive far too soon. You move through the dim house carrying an oil lamp, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. The first check is the kitchen, where you've banked the fire carefully, coals arranged to burn slowly through the night, covered with ash to reduce combustion, positioned safely away from anything flammable. The fire's warm glow is reassuring. You'll have live coals to restart from tomorrow. The kitchen itself is relatively clean, dishes washed and stored, tomorrow's breakfast items set out for early morning preparation. The water amphorae are full, thank the gods, one less thing to worry about at dawn. The household shrine gets a final glance. The oil lamp you lit there this morning has burned out and you don't relight it. The gods understand that perpetual flame is impractical. The day's offerings have been removed, the household ate them, waste not, and the shrine sits clean and ready for tomorrow's morning ritual. You murmur a brief prayer, half habit and half genuine, asking for protection through the night and favour for the coming day. Your children are already asleep, sprawled in their beds with that complete unconsciousness that only the young achieve. You adjust a blanket that's been kicked off, confirm that the chamber pot is accessible if needed, and feel that mix of exhaustion and affection that defines parenting across all eras. They'll wake, At dawn, ready to cause chaos. For now, they're peaceful. The enslaved workers are in their quarters, either sleeping or resting quietly. You don't check on them specifically. Their time is their own once daily duties are completed, but you're aware of them as part of your household's human inventory. Tomorrow they'll rise before you to restart the daily cycle. Tonight, everyone gets whatever rest they can manage. Here's your final mainstream fact. Roman daily life was shaped by the absence of artificial light more than any other single factor. Darkness dictated activity patterns, limited productive hours, created security concerns, and made evening one long process of winding down into sleep rather than our modern continuation of day activities under electric light. You check the doors one last time, front door locked and barred, any courtyard gates secured, windows shuttered properly. The ostiarius, if you have one, is stationed at his post looking resigned to another long night. The guard dog, if you keep one, is alert and has water available. The household's defences are set as well as you can manage them. Back in your own bedroom, you prepare for sleep. The chamber pot is positioned within easy reach. Middle of the night stumbling in complete darkness is how accidents happen. Tomorrow's clothing is laid out so you can dress quickly when dawn arrives. The brazier in your room has been allowed to burn low but not out. You'll want some warmth come morning. You blow out your lamp, the last light in the household, and darkness becomes complete. The sudden absence of light is disorienting even though you experience it every night. You can hear the city outside, distant voices, occasional shouting, dogs barking, the general murmur of urban life that never fully silences. But inside your shuttered house, you've created a pocket of relative quiet and safety. Your body aches in that specific way that comes from a full day of physical labour. Your shoulders hurt from water hauling. Your back complains from all the bending and lifting. Your hands are rough from cleaning and scraping and handling rough materials. You're not injured, not sick, just thoroughly used. This is the normal state of being in a world without mechanical assistance, where every task requires human muscle power. Your mind reviews tomorrow's obligations, market shopping for fresh food, the loom has a section to finish, one of the children needs to get to his lessons, you're running low on lamp oil, there's that invitation to dinner at a neighbour's house next week that requires a response. The mental checklist of domestic management never ends. Even as you fall asleep, part of your mind is planning, organising, anticipating. But for now, for these next few hours, you can rest. The daily battle against dirt, disorder, hunger and household collapse has reached its temporary pause. You've done what you could. The fires are banked, the doors are locked, the children are safe, the food storage is adequate, the household gods are fed, and nothing is actively on fire. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges. Water hauling, cooking, cleaning, shopping, childcare, textile work, maintenance, security concerns, and the endless small tasks that keep a Roman household functioning. The day after tomorrow will be identical, and the day after that. This is your life, maintaining civilization one daily chore at a time, fighting entropy constantly, never quite winning, but also never surrendering. Your breathing slows, the aches in your muscles begin to fade as you relax and sleep finally arrives. Outside, Rome continues, dangerous, noisy, chaotic Rome with its million residents all pursuing their own survival and ambitions. But inside your small household, behind your locked doors, you've created a space of relative order, safety, and comfort. The daily chores that seemed so overwhelming this morning are done. Tomorrow they'll return, relentless and unavoidable, but tonight you sleep, knowing you've managed another day successfully. And in just a few hours the roosters will crow, the sky will lighten, the household gods will need their offerings, the fires will need rekindling, the water will need hauling, and the entire exhausting glorious cycle will begin again. The rhythm of Roman household management continues, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. Each dawn brings the same essential tasks, each dusk the same relief. The specifics change, different meals, various guests, seasonal variations, but the underlying pattern remains constant. This is the texture of ancient daily life, not battles or politics or grand historical events, but the steady accumulation of small tasks that make civilization possible. You drift deeper into sleep, your breathing synchronized with the breath of the household around you, the enslaved workers dreaming of freedom or simply of rest, the children swimming through whatever fantastical imaginings occupy young minds, your spouse beside you, equally exhausted. Even the guard dog eventually settles into watchful doze. The darkness wraps around your home like a protective blanket. The oil lamps have all gone dark. The fires burn low, barely glowing. The house itself seems to breathe slowly, settling into the quiet hours before dawn begins everything anew. Outside, somewhere in the vast urban sprawl of Rome, lives continue, but they fade from your awareness as sleep claims you completely. In this moment, there is no worry about tomorrow's marketing, no concern about whether the grain supply will last, no anxiety about childcare or textile production, or the 1,000 other obligations that define your days. There is only the deep, necessary rest that allows you to rise again and continue the work. The household chores will wait, they always wait, patient and inevitable as the sunrise. For now, sleep. Deep, restful, earned sleep. Tomorrow's water can be hauled tomorrow. Tomorrow's fire can be lit when tomorrow arrives. Tonight, you've done enough. Rest well. Dream peacefully. The Roman household maintains itself through your labor, and your labor deserves this pause. Sweet dreams, faithful steward of the daily routine. May your rest be deep and undisturbed until dawn calls you back to duty once more.